Hi, this is Brass Check, and today we're talking with Jordan Chariton. Statuscoup.com is his website, and he's got an important new book out. I'm so glad this book was written. We all need to be talking about it, supporting it, reading it, buying it. And it's called We the Poisoned. And, we're all aware that the corporations have been given a free pass and seem to be able to do whatever they want, whether it's food adulteration or ramming various medical procedures down our throats. But then there's also these dramatic things that happen. They're in the news for a couple of days, and then the new news media just drops it. So Flint, Michigan, Flint, Michigan, remember everybody? Jordan has kept that flame alive, is continuing to tell the story, and he has a new book out called We the Poison. So welcome, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So tell me about, we were talking a little earlier before we hit the record button about the fact, one of the things that you do is you stay on these stories on a wide variety of issues, but you focus to a degree. One of the things you look at are these industrial corporate environmental caused or government facilitated catastrophes, which, as I said earlier, they hit the news and then they're gone. So tell us about that element of your work. And I realize you do a lot of other things too.
Yeah, I think because we have such a lazy slash corrupt media that has been hijacked by corporations, you basically, if you're lucky, get a week of coverage, whether it be mass shootings or a city being poisoned by their government, and then it's out of sight, out of mind. And I have stayed on this because in my reporting, which includes 21 separate trips to Flint, this is the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. I mean, wrap your head around that. Watergate, for example, was a bunch of knuckleheads breaking into an office. Nobody died. But this, as my book reveals, you have the federal government, the state government, city, county, private foundations, and Wall Street, all in a cabal to basically cover up and profit from people being poisoned by their water. And it's actually ongoing. The media has kind of hoodwinked people into thinking this is fixed. The water's fine. It's an ongoing cover up. I was just there for my book 2 weeks ago. The water's not fine. People are still showing me 10 years later, rashes from the water. People are still losing hair. The water smells and is discolored in many parts of the city. They haven't even changed the damaged pipes that were destroyed by essentially acid water. They haven't replaced all the pipes 10 years later, and you never hear about it. And this book reveals, we're talking political payoffs to silence sick residents, destruction of evidence, witness tampering, literally covering up a deadly bacterial outbreak, the Legionnaire's disease. The former governor knew about it 16 months before he notified the public, and a massive Wall Street privatization scheme that caused this, which you never hear about. The narrative has been this was a tragedy born from government trying to save money. This is not about saving money. The book shows this was about making money. They built a completely scam, unnecessary new water system and used the Flint residents as guinea pigs. So essentially the book, based on my reporting, I have thousands of confidential documents from the criminal investigation, whistleblowers. It kind of shows that they sacrificed poor black people and poor white people in Flint for a privatization scheme. 10 years later, cancer is surging in Flint. You will not hear about that in the media. People are dying. The water's still toxic. They don't have justice. And it's both parties. Most people look at the Republicans because there was a Republican governor, but you got a Democratic governor now in Michigan. You got a Democratic attorney general. Combined, they've left Flint to basically slowly die. And the attorney general, we could talk about this more, is trying to cover up that financial scheme that included Wall Street banks that caused this. So I really encourage people to read it because it's not really only about Flint. This is the playbook. Flint is the playbook that they are using right now in East Palestine, Ohio, after Norfolk Southern detonated toxic chemicals, and so many other places. They're basically using the playbook they used to cover up Flint in other communities that have been
Okay.
essentially sacrificed.
And it sets a terrible precedent because people may say, well, I don't live in Flint. It's terrible. I feel sorry for those people. Well, what prevents it from happening to your water system? Apparently, according to Jordan, nothing.
I mean, it's not just water. I mean, you might be focused on water, air, got air
Okay.
pollution all over this country, soil. I've covered communities where the soil, lead in the soil, arsenic in the soil, other things are 200, 300 times the allowable limit. And the allowable limit is basically set by lobbyists. It's always an arbitrary number. So we got air contamination, soil contamination, water is contaminated as we speak. South LA, I mean, residents were complaining for years, but it finally came out that the lead levels in South LA are hundreds of times over the allowable limit. I
Hundreds
mean, I
of
could,
times.
correct.
Like not
I
a
could go
100%, not 100%, like double, hundreds of times.
hundreds of times higher than the allowable limit, which again, the allowable limit of lead in water is zero. That's what the
Right.
CDC says.
Right.
But the EPA comes up with these arbitrary numbers that are not really based on health. They're just based on corrosion. But Flint is kind of the canary in the coal mine. I believe it's ground zero. And I've stayed on it because to me, a lot of things that should not be normalized in America have been normalized, I believe, by our media. But it should not be normalized when Americans are poisoned by their government. If they are poisoned by their government, even if you want to give the government the benefit of the doubt that it was an accident, which I do not, they should be made whole. They should have free health care, a financial restitution that meets the damage. I mean, there have been wealthier white communities after the Flint water disaster that preemptively changed their lead pipes without a problem. But 10 years later in Flint, they have not replaced all the damaged pipes. And I mean, the proof's in the pudding. People like to argue about race versus class. It's both. It's a
Right.
majority poor black community. They're poor. East Palestine, which was just essentially chemically nuked by Norfolk Southern. They detonated 5 rail cars of toxic vinyl chloride. My reporting and others show they didn't have to do that. They did it because they wanted to open the rail line quicker and not lose money. That's a poor white community. They're being screwed. So I really think, all this hubbubaloo and hysteria in the media about democracy is on the line. Well, your democracy doesn't really matter, and it's arguable we have one, if your water is being poisoned, if your air is being poisoned, and you've focused, props to you on the genocide in Gaza. Well, what about like slower moving genocides going on in America when the bodies don't pile up, right away? But I mean, I've gone back and forth to Flint for 8 years. I could tell you every time I go there, I find out about more and more people are dying, not elderly people. I'm talking 40s, 50s, 60s, kidney failure, liver failure, cancers. I mean, heavy metal poisoning, plus there was bacteria in that water. It does, everyone's different. You could get cancer within 6 months to a year. You could get cancer 10 years later. And it's just a shame because we have a media that is incentivized to only cover kind of theater, treat politics as sports, but not follow up. Because to me, what I have found, the cover-ups usually happen when all the cameras have left. And that's generally what happened in Flint. The camera, Rachel Maddow went there for a couple of days in 2016. The media went there. They showed you long lines of people waiting for water, and then they stopped covering it. And my book also exposes that the media is in on it. I exposed that a local ABC station in Flint, they had documents showing that there was a deadly Legionnaires outbreak, which is a waterborne pneumonia.
Yeah.
6 months after the water switch, they killed the story. If they would have ran the story then, I mean, you could have saved countless lives because people would have stopped drinking and bathing in that water. I can't report it for sure, but there was speculation that they got calls from the governor's office. So there's just multiple cover-ups from the government to the media and now the Attorney General of Michigan. Real quick, the investigation is over because she tanked it. She unnecessarily fired prosecutors that were investigated before her. She relaunched the investigation. She put in amateur prosecutors. Long story short, the Michigan Supreme Court threw out her criminal charges. This is a Democrat Attorney General. Well, the investigation's over. I put in freedom of information requests because I know she has documents outlining a major RICO case, a racketeering case that was her predecessors were going to charge that would have exposed the Wall Street banks that were involved with this privatization scheme to privatize Michigan's water. and others. And her office told me they didn't have the documents. I knew that was a lie. Then I publicly threatened to sue them. Suddenly they saw Jesus and said they'll look again. What do you know? They found the documents, but they won't give them to me. So there's a whole lot of corruption here. And like I say, I think older folks have a nostalgia about Watergate, but like this is the actual Watergate. We're talking people are dying and there is a massive government cover up. I mean, you got to be beyond a sociopath. You kind of have to be a psychopath to know that your constituents are literally drinking contaminated water. And instead of immediately telling them don't drink the water, you act to cover it up. And that's what happened here.
Wow. Yeah. Well, AGs and prosecutors, people aren't aware. I mean, that's one of the most corrupt classes in America. They are easily bought. And you see, and it's mostly when they buy an AG, and I'm going to say it. I'll say it. We'll put you on the line to say it. It's a very simple matter. And yeah, they can stumble bum and make mistakes and sort of flub the case. It's like a fixed basketball game where you're supposed to not win by 8 points. So you're going to win the game, but you're going to not quite, you know what I mean? And that's kind of what these guys do, or gals.
Well, here, just to make it simple, the attorney general of any state, they often have the conflict of they're supposed to go after bad actors, but they're also supposed to defend the state government. So here, they were supposed to be going after the former governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, and his people, while at the same time, the other side of the AG's office, the civil side, was supposed to be defending them. And my reporting shows, I believe that she tanked the investigation because the financial scam that I just talked about, which was basically building a completely unnecessary new water system, which they created a cockamamie excuse to allow Flint, which was almost bankrupt in 2014. They had no credit rating. They created this fake emergency to allow a broke city to borrow $100 million to help finance a completely unnecessary new water system that was essentially going to be used raw water for fracking, industry, agriculture. Most of it was going to be used for business, not residential consumption. But essentially, because the Attorney General's Office of Michigan signed off on that fraudulent deal, if it went forward in criminal court, the state of Michigan is on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars in liability because bondholders and others would sue the state of Michigan. It was told to me by several lawyers, I mean, states cannot print money like the federal government.
Right. It's a different world. Yeah.
It could bankrupt the state of Michigan. And then who fronted the money for this new water system? JP Morgan and Wells Fargo.
No.
And they also faced hundreds of millions of dollars of liability because they didn't do the due diligence to make sure that the Flint water plant, which I basically equate to one of these Boeing planes that are falling apart midair, they were basically adding the parts as they went. They were supposed to make sure, can this plant treat the water? My book lays out, I mean, it didn't even have proper equipment really to treat the water when they switched. So there's just there's so many tentacles to this. You got the state of Michigan trying to protect itself, and these are Democrats. So to be clear, I don't buy into team blue, team red. They're all corrupt. In this particular situation, it was a Republican administration that could have stopped this and covered it up. But Democrats were supposed to come in and deliver some justice and accountability, and they're helping cover it up. And at the end of the day, I always tell people this is not just about Flint, because if they are able to get away with it here, trust me, it's coming to a community near you. Might not be water. It could be air, soil, fracking, mining, plastics, whatever. We have, I call it the United Corporations of America. That's the flag behind me. And we have an EPA, but they're really there to, incentivize business rather than regulate. Same thing with Wall Street. We had a financial crash, not because we didn't have regulation. The regulators are not able to regulate because they've been purchased. Right. So it's a real cautionary. And the feedback I've gotten from the book is holy shit, how come this is not all over the news? And the sad truth is the news does not, they either don't care or they don't want this kind of information out there.
Yeah, we were talking earlier. I did a lot of reporting on election fraud, the mechanics of election fraud in the 90s. And I kept saying, guys, if we don't nail this down, this is going to metastasize. It's going to be all over the place. And, Greg Palast discovered that was true when Bush ran. And so this is a very similar case. This may seem a one-off, oh, it's a tragedy for one place. But Jordan's pointing out, no, this is going to be a template, a playbook that they're going to refer to and use over and over again. Oh my God, unbelievable. So of course, JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, it's hard to say the most corrupt banks in America because they're all pretty bad, but those two are at the very top of the list. So this was a bond scam as well as everything else.
Yeah, and you never hear about it. You never hear about it in the media, even the Michigan media. I mean, honestly, and I'm sure you've encountered this in your reporting, in a normal system, the hard part as a reporter should be getting the goods, building the sources, getting the documents. And then after that, if you break a scoop, other media should pick it up and expand upon it. It's been the opposite. I mean, it's been hard to report this. I've had, 21 trips to Flint, and it's taken a lot of time and work to build sources, get documents. But the harder part has been getting the media to give a damn. I mean, I remember in 2020 when nobody knew anything, about COVID, I drove to Michigan. I met with a top editor for the Detroit Free Press in a parking lot, windows rolled. I handed him documents from the criminal investigation that I got that literally showed I got the phone calls from the governor, his health director, the chief of staff. It showed they were all on the phone 22 times in 2 days at the same time that this deadly Legionnaires outbreak was spreading all over Flint, and the governor's environmental department, health department were trading freaked out communications. The prosecutors concluded they were covering it up. A couple of weeks before the governor's reelection, that this guy was number 2 at the Detroit Free Press. He tells me, this is smoking gun stuff. I'm going to bring it back to my editor, but we're inclined to do this with you. I even offered to put one of their reporters' names next to me because I know they want to take credit. Yeah. 3 days later, we got a pass where we don't have the resources. The Detroit Free Press doesn't have the resources when I've already done the reporting. I mean, I got a lot of stories like that. So the media, whether it's just they don't care or they're a bunch of well-to-do white people who don't give a damn about these poorer communities, they're part of this because they are the gatekeepers, for better or worse, to a lot of this information. And that's been one of the frustrating parts. I mean, I've broken stories, investigative stories on Flint in The Guardian, in Vice, in The Intercept. The majority of people in Flint don't know the truth.
Sure.
Because, they watch the local news for 5 minutes and the local news isn't reporting this stuff. The major Michigan outlets isn't reporting this stuff. And I'm not even from Michigan. All this stuff could have been reported and investigated by people there. So I always tell people, like, listen, yeah, people are exhausted with government, but if you can, go to your city council meeting because that's where they're screwing you to begin with. That's the entry point, because there's a whole lot of people in Flint, I'm sure, that wish they would have went down and learned what they were. Nobody voted to switch the water source. Nobody voted for a
really.
No.
Even though even though the city was going to be indebted from this bond issue.
So that's another part of this, and that's kind of the angle I've been pitching for my book to mainstream outlets to try and get them to cover it. Of course, they're not. But all this freak out about democracy on the line, if Trump gets back in there or whatever. But this is actually like a concrete example of democracy being removed. Because if people don't remember, the governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, he declared a financial emergency in cities like Flint and Detroit. And he installed unelected emergency managers, i.e. czars, to run the city. So their power superseded the elected mayor and city council. So basically you just had bureaucratic puppets doing the bidding of the governor in local cities. And that's what happened in Flint. He installed unelected emergency managers. My book exposes that it was a private foundation that kind of made a deal with the governor to install their lackeys because that private foundation had an interest in regionalizing the water system in Michigan, i.e. privatizing. So there was most of these decisions were made by unelected emergency managers that were basically carrying out the governor's wishes. And the results are deadly. I mean, people are dying. The state of Michigan put out a nonsense number that only 12 people died from this. That doesn't account for all the cancers. There's a cancer surgeon, Flint, an NYU toxicologist. Her research found that certain kinds of cancers are up 300% compared to before the water switch. Like I said, kidney problems, liver problems, not to mention the cognitive problems, memory issues, learning disabilities in children, crime going up because there's research showing lead poisoning affects your mood, et cetera. I mean, I talk to people in Flint. I meet, people I interview are in their 30s, 40s. I go back 2 years later. It seems like they've aged 10 years because the cumulative effect of heavy metal poisoning, it doesn't happen right away. It takes, years. So this is a crime against humanity. And I believe it's all been swept under the rug because Wall Street's involved and both parties are purchased by Wall Street. Also, there's I know that those documents I'm trying to get that the Attorney General's office won't give me, I know that the original prosecution team was going after government officials, both Democrats and Republicans. So this is a case of the very people that we're supposed to depend on for justice, our law enforcement, DOJ or state attorney generals, seem to be in on kind of sweeping it under the rug. And at the end of the day, we can argue about a lot of things because everything is tribal, everything is partisan, and most people are either blue team, red team, or just burn it all down. I believe the one thing that really should not be tribal, and in my experience, it's not. I've interviewed, NRA, gun-toting, meat-eating Republicans fighting because their water has been contaminated. Or their land has been taken via eminent domain for water pipelines or oil pipelines. I've interviewed tree-hugging leftists fighting. Like water should not be a partisan issue because if you don't have water for longer than 4 or 5 days, you could die. If you're consuming toxic water, I mean, you're going to get there's a whole host of illnesses, and it's just ironic and absurd that, we are spending nearly $1 trillion between the Pentagon, the CIA on national security. I don't really know what's a bigger national security threat than the water supply being contaminated. But
yeah, I mean, it's, as you made the comparison, it's the equivalent of bombing people, but it just happens in slow motion and there's no dramatic photographs. You see it every time you go back. I'm amazed 21 trips there. You see people just losing their health, losing their lives. I imagine some people that you talked to in the past aren't even with us anymore.
Yeah, it was very sad. I was there for the 10-year anniversary in April, and I was covering a march. And, I'm a journalist, but I'm human, so I've become friends with quite a lot of these residents. And to them, like I'm one of the only journalists who stayed on it, so they depend on me. And it was quite sad knowing I could think of 5 or 6 people I've become close with that weren't there because they died. And these were people that would have been on the megaphone at the rally and holding,
Oh, wow.
But people are tired. I mean, whether it's Flint or other places, at a certain point, physically, mentally, spiritually, when you're fighting, whatever it is, whether it's clean water, healthcare, climate, whatever your issue is, at a certain point, you lose the will to fight. And that's kind of what's going on in Flint. And that's generally what the capitalist system wants. They want you to be hopeless and lose the will to keep fighting. And, that's why I stay on it. I have lost money as a journalist covering Flint. Trust me, it's not.
I can't imagine how it could have been any other way. I mean, with the depth of research and, traveling's not free. It's a lot of money to get around and stay and eat and,
Yeah,
Wow.
To me, call me old fashioned, but I kind of have a problem with Americans being poisoned by their government, the government poisoning up covering it up, and then leaving them to slowly die. And that's what's going on. And it's also, like I said, if they get away with it in Flint, they're going to use that playbook elsewhere, and they are. I mean, your audience probably hasn't heard about it in the news recently, but remember Norfolk Southern blew up those trains last year? The EPA did the same thing they did in Flint. They're doing some BS testing. They're cherry picking the results. They're not even looking for a lot of major things. So they declare, oh, we're not finding any contamination. But independent researchers that come in, same thing happened in Flint, finding much higher levels of certain chemicals. And I'm going there, and I got sick in April in East Palestine. You might say that's anecdotal, but I mean, I got sick. My cameraman got sick. I'm talking I talked to an 18-year-old who was healthy before this. She's having seizures now. I'm talking to a 65-year-old man who has double breast cancer, very rare in men. It happened 18 weeks after they detonated these chemicals. I'm talking to a 50-something-year-old woman, perfectly healthy before. Now she's got dementia. Talking to people who are getting strokes. It's just, and they're being told, well, there's no evidence it's related. So it's just, there's so many cases like this in America. It's not always like an acute incident, like they switched the water or they blew up trains. Then you just have our infrastructure is over 100 years old in a lot of places, and it's corroding. Then you have the fact that we only got an EPA in the 70s, and you've had corporations dumping their waste in our water currently, and it's generally not regulated. PFAS, which are the forever chemicals, it's just now that they're starting to kind of regulate that. But forever, it wasn't regulated. That causes cancer, miscarriages, reproductive issues. So, you know, people are very focused on politics and who's up and who's down and, you know, different whatever's being flung at you on Twitter or podcasts or TikTok. I think you should focus on your water and your local corruption, because as I always say, the government is as toxic as the water. That's what's causing all this.
Well said. Well said. And, you know, it's odd. There's an endless amount of content on carbon, right? You know, and I've often wondered, it's like, gee, aren't there other toxins that we should be at least talking about? And it's almost as if, you know, I'm taking this sort of in a different direction. It's almost as if that narrative is being used to just crowd out the detailed conversations we need to have about specific toxins in specific places and how deadly they are right this minute. Like, could maybe 10% of all the money being spent on carbon concerns be spent on these kind of issues? We'd have a different country if we did that.
And also, I mean, what we fart out in the morning in terms of the money we send to Ukraine or Israel or wherever, and whatever you think about that, I'm not even going to get into that.
Sure.
We could replace all the lead pipes in America like that, and it would create jobs. We could actually, you know, regulate.
Great, a perfect thought. Yeah, I mean, it never even occurred to me.
I mean, literally to replace all of Flint's infrastructure would have cost like $4 or $5 billion, which is pennies on the dollar for the federal government. They didn't do it, but they have that, you know, in a nanosecond for other countries. Same thing with, you know, corporations dumping their water, you know, in rivers and reserves and this and that. There's money we could spend to prevent that from happening. We could have put in reverse osmosis systems in Flint homes and other communities that have, but I don't think, it's not about the money. I don't think the federal government or state governments want to set the precedent that they could actually do big things to help working people. If this happened in Ann Arbor, an hour from Flint, which is wealthier and white, you might get more aggressive federal relief. Same thing, many people don't realize in Flint, in East Palestine, Ohio, in many places that have had these government-made disasters, the federal government doesn't declare disasters. Whereas for tornadoes, hurricanes, natural disasters, they do a disaster declaration, which the federal government takes over. You can send FEMA in, the Army Corps of Engineers. They don't do disaster declarations for places like Flint, East Palestine, because it's not a natural disaster. Thus, you don't get the same resources. I mean, that's from the Stafford Act, which was basically, you know, created because a lot of right-wing governments wanted states' rights and didn't want the federal government coming in and taking over. But at the end of the day, whether it's natural disasters, government disasters, whoever caused it, it's a
Right.
disaster. I mean, Flint would have been made whole if the federal government, I mean, they could have sent the Army Corps in and dug up the pipes and been done with it in a year. So we have a
Yeah.
lot of backwards, ineffective government. And the common denominator is if you're in the wrong zip code, if you don't have a certain income, maybe you have the wrong skin color or whatever, you're going to be sacrificed. And most people the hard part is reaching people on this, like getting them the information, because, YouTube and all these other places, their algorithms are manipulated to prop up
Mm.
hot takes and people fighting and not this stuff. But once I get it to people, I mean, a perfect example, I was in East Palestine interviewing a sick resident because of that Norfolk Southern explosion. And she said to me, wow, because I was also going to Flint, I thought that was fixed because I never heard about it anymore.
Right.
That's people's general. I don't blame people. If you don't see it anymore, it's out of sight, out of mind. I mean, before I went to Flint, I naively assumed, oh, I'm sure they're going to, I'm sure they're working on this and trying to fix it. People are just floored that this is still going on 10 years later, that no one has been held criminally accountable. I mean, if I poisoned you,
Oh, yeah.
intentionally or not, I'd be going to jail.
Yep.
If wealthy white government officials do it, they're all scot-free. None, like I said, the current attorney general who wants to run for governor, by the way, Dana Nessel, she fired all the original prosecutors who were actually building a case, by my reporting in the book. They
Yeah.
were building a case against the governor for involuntary manslaughter. Like, they were not screwing around. They were actually going for it. They
Wow.
were also following the money. She comes in. I talked to lawyers who said they have never seen anything like it. She fired all of the special prosecutor. She filed the chief investigator. She dropped all the charges. Then she recharged lesser crimes, and the Supreme Court of Michigan threw it out. So,
And most Americans and unfortunately most people in Flint and in Michigan don't even know what you've just told us because it doesn't appear in their local media. Wow. So the book is We the Poisoned, and is this a book people can get in bookstores?
yeah, it's kind of a hit or miss. Like, I went to Barnes & Noble in Flint and they didn't have it, but they told me it's because it was selling so much online. So you could check in your local bookstore, Barnes & Noble, independent stores. You could definitely order it online too. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookstores.com. And audio version is coming out in September.
good.
So if you like listening to your books, you could purchase the audio version. But yeah, sales, it's tough when you're up against an election. The first week or two, we were doing well, but then the DNC happened and everything else. So definitely, if you can, get the book, spread the word. Because like I said, like, the book is about Flint, but it's about a lot bigger than Flint. This is about Wall Street, private
Yeah.
foundations, government colluding to basically allow people to slowly die.
And corrupt law enforcement. And I imagine, where are the public health officials? Where's the medical community? Nowhere to be found, I'm assuming.
They were in on the cover-up.
Okay.
The Michigan Health Department, the Michigan Environmental Department, my book shows there were calls, do not put out a public notification about the Legionnaires outbreak. It'll inflame the situation.
And guys,
and
if you think this is just local to Flint, this can be done anywhere, anytime, and with the same results. And if you don't have someone like Jordan around to keep the story alive, it will be buried. So I'm going to recommend everybody go to your bookstore, because I kind of rail. I was very disappointed with how the bookstores behaved during COVID. They did a lot of censorship. That's something that I've talked a lot about with my members. But they're still there. And I think, they want to do the right thing. This is a chance for your local bookstore to do the right thing. Go in and say, hey, could you order this book for me? And maybe that will stimulate a conversation.
Yep.
Opens the door, and you can say, well, it's about the poisoning in Flint. Because, even though they piss me off lately, the people that work in bookstores, they are sources of communication. Like, they talk to buyers. mean, customers, and they care. They want to do the right thing. So I would guys, that doesn't cost you anything to do. Just go to your local bookstore or two or three if you got a bunch of them. You don't have to do it all in one day, but if you see a bookstore, pull the car over and go in and ask if they have the book. You don't even have to buy it. It's just, I recommend you do buy it somewhere, but that puts it on their radar. They might look it up. Maybe when the book dealer comes by and shows that book, they'll go, maybe we should carry this. This is a very important book.
And a lot of times, if you do that, they'll order like 3 or 4 copies just to test the waters. And then if those copies sell, they order more.
There you go. And you may know your bookseller, and booksellers can be great champions of ideas. All they have to do is put the book in a prominent place, and they'll sell a lot more if they put it in a random shelf somewhere. So that's one thing you can do. I think everybody should get this book to support it. I think also, I often ask this, guys, if you can buy more than one copy, you have a library. Most libraries are very happy to get a quality book, especially on this kind of important subject. So there's a lot we can do to help this initiative. Books are powerful. Books are really powerful, especially if they get around. And then, Jordan, of course, you have a Substack. And
we're actually our main platform is YouTube, so you could subscribe on YouTube, Status Coup, COUP. We also have a Substack.
Okay, so people could go to YouTube, and then it's called Status Coup.
Yeah, COUP.
And I'm so ignorant. Does YouTube allow people to donate to you through YouTube?
Yeah, but I tell people to donate through our website because YouTube takes a nice cut from that,
Oh, yeah,
30%.
So
statuscoup.com/donate. You could donate any amount. And our main model is membership. So we have right now about 1,600 paying members.
Okay.
So you could, and that supports our I would have never been able to publish this book if people weren't, $5 a month helping me get to Flint. So that's statuscoup.com/join. We do a monthly members call and other good stuff.
I always say we don't get the environment we deserve. We don't get the education we deserve. We don't get the medical system we deserve, but we do get the media we deserve because we all seem to have money for the cable and for the newspaper and for Taylor Swift tickets. I don't think any of my viewers go to see, but you know what I mean? We've got money to spend on these things. If we don't support people like Jordan, I'm going to say we're going to get what we deserve. Honestly, this is a self-preservation issue. 21 trips to Flint on all our behalfs. If you're looking for somebody's work to support, this is pretty clear. Of what
I should also mention we did a documentary for the 10-year anniversary. And it is not like one of these watered down Flint documentaries. So you could get that at flintfatigue.com, flintfatigue.com.
Great. We'll put all these items. Some of them will be on the screen. Some of them are going to be in the notes. But hey, Jordan, I had no idea how bad it was in Flint. I didn't realize all the play. Here's what is in my ignorance. I thought, oh, it was an old system. It needs to be replaced. They didn't replace it fast enough, but surely they've taken care of it by now. This is my ignorance, and I'm supposedly an informed guy. So I've just learned everything that I thought was true about this story is not correct. And I wouldn't have known it had it not been for you and the 21 trips and the book and the film and all the stuff you've been doing. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.